By the way, most marketing failures aren't tactical, they're conversational. So we blame the ad creative or the wrong channel or the timing, but the real failure usually started way earlier when certain conversations never happened. And your job as a leader isn't to be the marketing expert, it's to be the diagnostician, to ask the questions that reveal whether your marketing engine is actually healthy or not. So, let me actually walk you through 6 conversations that you can have with your marketing leader. Let me pull the document up. Of course, the first conversation you need to have is the one about attribution, right? So, here's the question you have to ask them: show me one customer journey from awareness to close, not a report, one real human being who became a customer. And almost every team can show you dashboards. But when you say, okay, cool, now walk me through one real person, like the LinkedIn post they saw, the Google search 3 weeks later, that's usually when things start falling apart. Not because your team is bad, they've just been trained to measure activity instead of actual behavior. And so, what you're really testing is whether they know the difference between correlation and causation, and whether they can spot the moments that actually influenced a sale. So then you push a little. So what channels would you cut if we lost 30% of our budget tomorrow? If they can't answer confidently, that's a sign they're managing programs, not optimizing for outcomes. And another one I like is, which prospects who didn't buy consumed the most content. Because if your biggest binge watchers don't convert, you might not have an engagement problem, you might have an audience problem. And so, what good looks like here is they can pull up your dashboards, grab a random customer, and clearly show you the 2 to 3 moments that actually mattered. The second conversation you need to have is about the audience and not, who are we targeting? It's more about who are we not serving and how much revenue are we leaving on the table by trying to serve everyone. This question is really important because most companies define their ICP way too broadly because they don't want to exclude anyone. And that's exactly how you end up with campaigns that technically apply to everyone and resonate with no one. So, what you're really testing here is to see whether the team has made hard decisions about who to exclude, whether they know the difference between your ICP, who you hunt, and your broader audience, who you educate, and whether they can explain why someone who would choose you over doing nothing. And a great follow up to that is what percentage of our pipeline actually comes from our ICP. If it's under 60%, you probably have a positioning issue. But a really good one to also ask is you can ask them, read me the last 3 pieces of content we published and who were they specifically for. So if the answer sounds something like, decision makers at mid market tech companies, that's not specific enough. Your team should be able to say something like, oh, it's targeted at the VP of sales at a 500 to 200% B2B SaaS company and who missed quota like 2 quarters in a row and is under pressure from the board. So that level of specificity tells you they know who you're talking to. And finally, you could ask, show me a prospect we disqualified last month and why. If they can't tell you this, that means you need to work on your targeting. Now, the third important conversation you need to have is about your messaging. If a prospect only remembered one thing from our website, what should it be? And can you prove that's what they're actually taking away? If people don't quickly understand what you do and why it matters, you don't have a marketing problem. You have a business problem. So you're testing whether your team knows the difference between what you want to say and what customers are actually hearing, and whether they're validating your message with real buyers, not just internally. Right? So, one simple exercise question for this would be, what words do our customers use to describe us that never appear in our marketing? Right? So, if your customer, for example, says, oh, it's fast, it's simple, it saved us weeks, but your site says something like synergistic integrated platform solutions, I've actually seen this somewhere, you see the issue. So, what good looks like is simple. Your team can explain your positioning in under 15 words, and real buyers get it in under 30 seconds. Right, so the fourth question is about experimentation, or what did we kill last quarter? What did we kill last quarter, and what did we learn from it? So if your marketing team hasn't killed anything recently, they're not learning. They're just adding more stuff. So what you're testing is you're seeing if your marketing team actually has a learning system. Do they run experiments or do they just try things? So you have to ask, what was the hypothesis behind this campaign? And what would have proved you wrong? Or, show me three experiments that failed and what we learned from it. If they can't clearly explain the learning, then no learning is actually happening. So this is what good looks like, right? Your marketing team has a hypothesis. They test it out, they have success criteria, they learn something, and then they take the next step. Now, the fifth conversation you also need to have with them is about investment. If we doubled your budget, what would you do? And if we cut it in half, what would you stop? This cut question tells you everything you need to know about how they prioritize. So you're testing whether they're managing a budget or managing outcomes, and whether they've actually reallocated dollars based on performance, or whether they're just repeating last year's plan. So you have to ask them, what are we spending money on that we can tie to revenue or leading indicators? And my favorite one is, if you personally owned 10% of this company, what would you spend your money on? Your great marketers can answer both the double and the cut scenarios in under a minute because they've already thought through both. And then, of course, the last is the talent conversation. Who on your team is world class at what they do, and how do you know? Because marketing is one of the easiest functions to hide mediocre performance in. Nice slides, nice assets can easily distract you from the fact that nothing is actually moving. So, what you're testing is you're testing whether your leader hires for outcomes, not just shiny CVs, and whether they're building real specialists, and whether they can measure impact, not just activity. So, just ask them, who on your team isn't working out, and what did you learn? And if they say, oh no, they've all worked out, then that's a problem. You could follow that question up with, who on your team could run marketing at a company twice our size? That tells you who's actually developing into leadership. And so, what good looks like here is they can name their top performers, explain why they're exceptional, and point to at least one person they moved out because they weren't delivering. And this isn't about catching your team out, by the way. It's about you upgrading the conversations that you're having before you make very expensive decisions. So here's what I want you to do. Okay, so just pick one module. Like, don't overhaul everything. Just pick one conversation that you would like to have that you feel the most uncertain about. And then just ask them one of the questions that I just gave you within those conversations. Bring it into your next one-to-one. So, but keep it casual and clear. And then pay attention to how the conversation goes. Do they answer without needing a week of prep? Do they pull up real data? Do they get curious or defensive? And that reaction tells you everything about the maturity of your marketing engine and how ready it is for the next growth. And then you just repeat it, one conversation at a time, one module at a time, one question at a time, one better conversation at a time. Because the conversations you have become the results you eventually see.